Welcome to video number 2 on introductory R. I'm going to start out, this lesson is mostly just about some basic functions of data frames because they're very important, very useful. The first thing I'm going to do is use the setSeed function to set a constant random number sequence. This is just so I get the same answer every time I run this. It's not that important to know about. It's just something I'm going to do so I get the same answers every time I run my code, and you'll get the same answers every time you run your code. So okay, I've just set it to, and you can put any number in here, and the number you put in will determine that, kind of make the pseudo-random number generator deterministic. The next thing I'm going to do is create a matrix. I showed you how to do this in the previous video. This is the matrix function. It creates a matrix. These are the dimensions of the matrix: 5 rows, 5 columns, and I have 5 by 5 or 25 elements, each of which is going to be a random number generated on this random standard normal distribution. So now the matrix will be called M here. Just run this code. And I've got all these elements. And I'm going to put this, I'm going to use the as data frame function to coerce or force this matrix into a data frame format. So now I have a data frame object which contains basically the same information that the matrix did. Now, data frames, once you import them or convert one data object into a data frame format, it will inherit, it'll make up column titles or column names, V1 through V5 in this case. And that's often not what we want. If it's real data, they probably have column identifiers that are more useful to us than that. And sometimes we want to rename them. And this is how you rename, one way of renaming columns in a data frame in R is to use this names function, and then on the right hand side you've got the names, the sequence of names of that of the data. So I've got 5 columns and I want them named in this order, and so I put in this character vector those names. Now if I left something out, it would leave a blank. You have to be a little bit careful about this process to make sure that the names that you put in are actually aligned up with the names that you have in the original data, but this isn't a big data set, so it's fairly straightforward. Now to actually access elements or information in your data frame, you can do it in a similar way to that you would in matrices. So in this case, I'm just going, this little call here just returns for row 1 all the columns. So this is something we do with a matrix as well. And then in this case, we can return all for column 1 all the rows. So this is one way we can access information in data frame. And of course, naturally, we can also go like this. This is going to be the first row, the element in the first row, third column. So it's that single value. So that's handy. But because it's a data frame, we can also work from the actual column name. In fact, that's common. So here, if it's easier for me to remember the actual names of the variables, I can get them by just typing in the name itself. If I run this code here, it's going to return this age variable here in its entirety. So all elements in that column. So that's a handy way to access it. Okay, now I want to talk about some of the data manipulation, basic data manipulation in R using data frames. And the first thing I want to do is imagine if we want to create a data set that has fewer columns, only 2 selected columns, age and height in it. Well, you should have an intuition about how to do this. This is the destination of this is the data frame I'm going to create. This is the origin data frame, and I've got the square brackets in here. On the left-hand side, I've got nothing, which means I want all the rows. On the right-hand side, I'm simply referring in this character vector to the names of the variables I want to keep. So if I go like this, creates a smaller data frame. 5 observations, just like the original data frame, but only 2 variables. Now, what about the converse situation where let's say you want to keep from this data frame, I only want to keep a subset of the observations, maybe only the rows that have a particular quantity. So in this case, any row that has an age less than 1 I want to keep. Well, it's the same basic idea. I have a destination data frame here, I have the origin data frame here, the data frame I'm working from. Now, inside the square brackets, on the right-hand side of the column, of the comma, I have nothing, because that means I want all the columns in this data frame. On the left-hand side, I have the condition for selecting rows. In this case, as long as the element in the row is less than 1, it will give it to me. And now we have a data set with 2 columns or 2 variables and 3 rows or 3 observations. Now here I'm going to create another smaller data set. It's just got these 2. It's got a different 2 columns in it. And I'm doing that to illustrate the use of combining, or cbind, in R. So cbind takes 2 data frames that, provided they have the same number of rows, it will smash them together. So it's like there's 2 stacks of data. Think of it, 2 Excel spreadsheets, and you're just bringing the columns together. And so cbind is the function. You put the name of one data set, one data frame, and the name of the other data frame, and you run the code, and you'll get them both combined. Combined df has 4 variables and 5 observations. The last thing I want to do is create another data set that actually has a restricted number of rows. So here, even smaller df has all observations where age is less than 1. I'm going to create another data set that has all observations greater than or equal to 1. And then I'm going to use the rbind function to append these data to each other. Okay, so I've got this data set, other even smaller df has 2 observations, right, for age and height. This one here, even smaller df, has 3 observations, and here I'm appending them, piling one on top of the other. And provided they have the same columns, I can just use this little function. I end up with appended df, which has 2 columns and all the rows appended together again.